Welcome to Full Stack Business Owner, where we are enhancing your full stack of skills to build wealth inside and outside your business. Today, we're actually with a special guest, Jarrad Mahon from Perth Property Insider, great podcast, and Investor's Edge. And today, we're actually talking all things full stack business owners talk about. Now, if you want to join the conversation, head over to Facebook and join a Full Stack Business Owner community. We do have a bit of a chat going on over there and be part of the fun. Now, before we dive into this one, let's cue your infamous disclaimer, Charlie.
Charlie here from Full Stack Business Owner. I need to let you know that Grant, myself, and the Full Stack Business Owner team are in no way, shape, or form qualified to give you financial advice or pick investment products. We highly encourage you seek out and engage the use of professionals when making financial decisions or comparing investment products. All right, Jarrad, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you here, and I'll just tee this one up for the listeners. You're someone I've actually been I'll say semi-stalking a little bit online for the last couple of years, and of course, we also do some work with your podcast. But I just think you're a really good example of what we kind of stand for at Full Stack. So you're someone who's playing in the business camp. You're also doing some investing stuff. You've got a great business I will mention as well, and also a great podcast. But I suspect the listeners of this show don't know you as well as I do. So could you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about your business and what you do?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys. A really big fan, of course. And it's good to know two people that are almost as passionate about business and property as I am.
Almost.
You caught that, Grant?
That was good. No, I like that.
So how many hours do we actually have to talk today? We'll have to put a lid on it probably. But
we could go as long as we need here. It's like, if we've got to cut it into 2 episodes, we'll cut it into 2 episodes.
Just wanted to know how much runway we've got. But I have a Perth property management and investment agency called Investor's Edge Real Estate, and we're one of the most awarded property managers and most highly rated on Google for Perth. So we manage 890 odd properties across the whole of Perth, and thankfully I've got a really amazing team that are highly experienced, and they're the heroes in my eyes. I take a lot of the credit, as you do to the business owner, but couldn't do it without them. And they have that investment mindset, which is a really key piece to differentiating us as property managers. So most property managers do a 9-day course. They can be in their early 20s. They've never invested in property. They've got no clue about investing. So how can they ever know to improve your returns? They've got no concept of your returns. They're just, ticking boxes and following process and just don't have that mindset. So that's a big differentiator for us. And we also use that real close relationship that we have with our property investors to prevent stress and help them on that journey for investing. So our ultimate purpose is to try and help them improve their lives. And let's face it, tenants aren't second-rate citizens either. How we go about our management is we respect them as much as we do our landlords. And many of them are actually on their own journeys and become investors themselves and get us to manage their properties. And, this day and age, someone can be a rent investor and have many properties under their belt before they even go into home ownership. So just we have a lot of fun in that property management space, but also I love making Perth Property Insider, and very grateful for Valor Media for producing it for me and doing such a great job there. So.
I appreciate the kind words. Now, I will frame this up. You are an absolute expert on Perth, and we're actually probably not going to talk about Perth that much in this episode. We might do a round 2 on that one, because there's a really fascinating thing that I want to explore in this episode more deeply. You have a unique synergy where your business is in, let's say, real estate, and then you also invest in real estate. So there's some amazing synergies between what you do day to day versus what you do to invest, where for people like Grant and I, we play online a lot of the time, and then we invest in real estate and other things, as I suppose, outside of it. They're not really interconnected as you would be there. I'm really curious, though, at what point in your business journey did you realize it was important to invest outside of your business rather than just focus on that?
Well, I kind of think back to when I was 16 and I got given the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I know it's changed the lives of many investors out there, and if you haven't read it, pause this podcast, perhaps. Go read.
No, pause podcast.
No. Listen to every episode.
Okay.
Subscribe to all that stuff.
Finish the podcast and then go. Sorry, guys, I overstepped the mark there. Don't want to be cut off before we get too far.
What a fantastic book, though, isn't it?
Great.
So good. And it really blew my mind because it gave me a role model as a rich dad. And my dad was the poor dad. So he had his own civil engineering business and he was a great technician, but not a great business owner. And he was focused on his work. And despite working in property development and creating some of the biggest land estates in Perth, he never thought to invest himself, which was just an absolute travesty when I look back on the access that he had and the opportunity he had. And, he was making everyone else money and not thinking about how to get ahead. And he was a great technician, but never built the business into being, leveraging and working on the business, never probably read a business book in his life and never had a business coach. So he was so focused on that work that I felt he wasn't around to spend time with us as kids. And that was the real thing that drove me to decide at a very young age that I wanted to learn everything I could about investing and set myself up so that I could elevate our family to actually having wealth. Those experiences you have when you're a child and, these are first world problems, don't get me wrong, but it's very real to me at the time that my friends are coming to school and, able to freely buy their lunch at the canteen. Meanwhile, I open my lunchbox and I've got a Vegemite sandwich and an apple. And, I just ask my parents, why can't I have lunch to that, buy lunch? Money doesn't grow on trees, Jarrad. We're not made of money. All those conditioning things. I used to have to get my uniforms from the secondhand shop. All of these things stick with you. And then when your dad's not around because he's doing, 60, 70 hours a week, that sticks with you. So I wanted to be also present and around for my kids and to create enough wealth that I had choices. So that was what gave me my burning desire. And I ended up becoming an electrical engineer and following him in his footsteps. And I was still trying to find my path to wealth, but I knew that I wanted to start investing in property as soon as I could. And as soon as I got my first job, I bought my first property at 22, and I was still trying to find my path to wealth at that point. So investing was a priority before I even got into business, but the modeling that my dad did as the poor dad made me want to be a rich dad myself when I grew up and have that different role model. So
awesome story there. And pardon me, I didn't realize how much our journeys actually relate there. Like my father worked in the building industry. He was a builder and we built all these amazing homes and he didn't keep any of them. I'm like, what? Looking back on it.
My dad's completely different. He worked in IT.
Well, this is interesting. You invested first, so clearly driven from your youth. When did the transition to business then come? Like, was this and I'm going to ask a pointy question around this. Did you come to the consideration that, hey, I'm not going to be able to get to the wealth goals I have in this job and where it's going, I better do my own thing? Yep. Or was this like a natural progression where it's just like a great opportunity came up?
Well, in my first 3 years as an engineer, I bought properties, renovated them, did small developments, and I'd grown my asset base a bit from nothing at the time. And I was incredibly frustrated with my 4 different property managers. So I had long vacancy with tenants not having tenants. I had property damage and tenants skipping town, and I could never reach them. And it was hard to follow up on them like countless times just to get an answer and a simple thing done. So my investing journey nearly actually ended at that point because I thought about, is this all too hard and shall I just sell all the properties and move on? Because the property manager was just so crucial to your ongoing peace of mind. So I looked around.
I can really see some of those experiences driving some to the share market, like more passive assets. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people do have a terrible experience with property managers.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, Jarrad, that you saw that problem and decided to solve it yourself, just not move to a different place. I'm like, the easier ones just go to a different property manager. But it's like, no. I'll go and open one.
Yeah, well, I did actually try changing property managers a few times and looked around everywhere for that investment mindset and someone that would just, return my calls, basic stuff, you'd think.
You'd think.
It was clear that there was a big gap in the market when I couldn't find anyone. And so at the time, I sold some of my properties to give me the capital to have that runway to start things from scratch and not need an income. And that, I probably may not have had the opportunity if I didn't already have some wealth created with my investing so far. And it also took the pressure off because, starting from scratch, you don't appreciate how little you know, and not having ever been in business or real estate before. My cash drain was steep and my learning curve was even steeper.
Absolutely. I think every business owner can relate to that, right? It's and even then, what a phenomenal way to be able to start a business by being able to sell some property to provide that runway. Like many people never get their start because they just can't get the funds together to actually support a business getting off or have to take on immense debt to do so. So we're into the journey here and you've acquired a couple of properties, sold a couple of properties, started the business, and then inevitably gone through this learning curve that we all have. How did you go about juggling the two worlds? Because at this point, you've got a business you can grow and reinvest in and do things in property, and then you could also acquire more property or other investments in the way you do it. Was there any way you thought about it, or was there anything you were particularly looking to achieve between the two?
Look, it was incredibly exciting at first to be in a job where I could improve my investing skills every day and grow my contacts and, learn through my clients' experiences as well and feed that back around to help them. And, I continued to invest in property, but our business also at the start took a lot of cash, and to grow from just the two of us and getting the first few employees and then realizing, what I've really actually just bought myself here is a job. How do I grow into having a middle management layer? So that was then the next big step where you're paying for middle management, but you can't yet really afford it. So I wanted to be more removed from the day-to-day and just do the things I love. And so making that investment was important for me. And I also added then a business development manager so that I didn't have to do the front end of the selling of our service. And then, of course, you've got the incredible investment in marketing to generate the leads and grow. And when you don't have that reputation and other things to lean on, it's just, massive marketing spend to drive the business out there, isn't it? Have you guys been in similar positions when starting from scratch?
Well, one of the things I'm probably a little bit more envious of here is like I'm thinking in the moment of like you've got a very people-heavy business. You've got to have like somewhere to operate from, like offices and things like that, where a lot of the people in the online world, like Grant and I, we just spin up a new domain and we don't necessarily have to worry about like leases and things in the same world, where this is a much more capital-intensive and people-intensive business. Like to get one off the ground at the level you're talking about, we're not talking about spending 10 grand. We're probably talking about investing several $100,000 in getting the business to that point.
So look, that continued to suck cash, and I was always torn because I wanted to be doing more investing at certain times, but you've just got to give your business what it needs as well to get to the next level. Otherwise, it's just going to stay you and your business partner and no leverage and no scale. So that was a conscious choice of actually, okay, the business needs the cash now, I'm putting it in. And then about 7 years into the business, my business partner and I started to drift apart. So she had different goals. She was winding back and preparing for retirement and taking 6-month holidays at a time. And it was a really difficult period for me. So, and her. So we were wanting to do different things with the business. I was driving hard, doing 50, 60 hours a week, and she was on, a beach in somewhere in Europe. So
seems fair.
Yes. Well,
seems really aligned, right?
Yeah, it's completely aligned. That's how you win.
It was tough. So we were not putting in equal contributions, but she wanted to be remunerated equally. So it seemed really unfair to me at the time, and we should have had an agreement in place on how to handle that transition. So that would be something that I'd suggest any business owner does that's got a business partner, look at, are your roles going to change and how could you change your remuneration as they do? So big learning.
That's huge there. So how did that play out? Because I mean, my understanding, and I hope to be corrected, is, but I don't believe you have a business partner today.
No, that's how it played out.
There you go.
So was this, you took over the same business, or you went, no, this thing, we'll just replace it with something else?
So we got in one disagreement about it all, and she asked to be bought out of her 50% share, which was a huge shock because I'd never planned for it. I'd never prepared for it. And my choices, because we had a pretty ordinary buy-sell agreement, there was no option for paying her out over time. It was basically come up with $1.5 million, Jarrad, I want it like ASAP, or we're going to sell the business. That was my options. And it was, really daunting. But I can feel the memories coming up right now.
I can hear the stress kicking in. I'm like, just lay down on the couch and here's a pillow to hug.
Yeah. So
I've got some good news. I've heard this turns out okay.
It does.
I feel like I know the ending.
We're building.
But still, to be, it's funny how many people end up in businesses, and like when you're starting out, is like to get a business partner can be a huge advantage because you get that speed.
I wouldn't take it back. We complemented each other perfectly. We were an awesome team. We were in perfect alignment for 7 years. We did build an amazing business to that point. But, I just wish I'd had the foresight or previous experience or other mentors around me to say, hey, look at how this transition is going to happen. She's much older, going to want different things. Look at your buy, sell and cater for paying someone out over time instead of like immediately. Yep. But thankfully, the one silver lining to this was that my investing that I've been doing in my properties outside of the business enabled me to pull together that cash. I'd sold everything. It was just, we're clearing deck, pulling all cash in. I took a loan against the business in part as well. And that enabled me to pay her out. So it was a big, balls to the wall moment where I was used to running the business with having a partner, and then to transition and see me as the sole leader and, really grow into that leadership role as well was significant too.
Can I just ask a clarifying question there? Had you been buying more properties in that 7 years and then had to clear everything out? Yeah. Was this just the original group? So you had been. So you'd acquired more.
Not many, but at least two. Yeah.
And then all of it, gone to – wow.
Yep.
Talk about
loan against the business.
Because there was the refinancing wasn't enough. Like I had to just get all the equity out and, clear house. Literally. So it was
big move. So what happened next?
Well, in the 7 years since, I've nearly doubled the business, thankfully, and through some very difficult times in the Perth market too. So we had 4 or 5 years of a down market where rents dropped 33%, and once I'll come to that in a minute as being one of my bigger challenges and wins, but once the business got to a size that it was growing more organically, and I had an amazing team, and we'd won all these state and national awards and had that reputation, I was able to really dial in the profits over the last few years, which was, awesome. But it was a massive journey, and it was also really important for me to, in the early days, I used to just try and grow as fast as I could, but in the last few years, I'm more about growing sustainably so that I don't overstretch the team, and I'm really conscious of how are they feeling and how are they managing, because we want to keep that service, excellent regardless of how much growth we're bringing on. So I've at least been able to, dial in profit, and that's enabled me to then start investing more in the last 2 years and getting as much outside the business as possible. So we were able to upgrade our house into one of the best public school catchment areas 18 months ago, and it's given us a much more amazing lifestyle. But I certainly delayed gratification on that for a very long time. So the house was the last sort of piece to giving something more back to our lifestyle. And we also did that with a bit of an investment mindset too, so that we weren't just going and, buying something that's not going to perform. I put that investment lens on, and it's worked out really well as well. So I also wanted to take more time off to spend with my daughter each week and support some of the mentoring with teenagers and charities that I do. And that's, just carve out a life that I always wanted. It's no point getting to this point and then, continuing to work 60 hours a week and repeating the same mistakes as my dad. So I'm very conscious of building this golden parachute of wealth again outside the business, because it saved me at various points in the past. It helped me create the business in the first place. It helped me buy my business partner out. And now I'm just looking for that golden parachute that if everything ever went to crap with the business, not that 99% chance it won't, but I'm just very conscious of building that outside now to have as a fallback.
It's really nice to have options, right? It's like a lot of people that hadn't made those types of moves wouldn't have had the options. And you can think of so many of these. It's like you look at how many industries just evaporate because of innovation.
Yep.
Like if you're all in on a business like the Yellow Pages and then things change, is like you could be wiped out, where the ability to start again, I mean, it's not ideal. You have to obviously sell a lot of your properties. And I dare say if you calculated what those ones are worth today, you'd probably be a little bit stingy.
That head shake was a joke. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, let's not talk about that one.
For the listeners at home, yes, it was a grimace and a head shake.
Yeah, I got you. I feel you. But it's amazing what it's been able to create for you. As you said, is like you got the business off the ground and then we're able to take over it from here. I think this is a great segue point to kind of go from this is the business journey of getting to that point. But I'd really want to unpack this one as well, as I know our listeners will be very keen. How have you approached investing and the methodology around your investing as a side your business post this? Like you got the business back on track, you got the lifestyle and a family thing happening and your own home. How are you thinking about what you invest in and your methodology there? As I know we have different views here, let's just say.
Well, in my early days of investing, when I had a much lower income, I bought where I could afford, and I partnered with others to get the money for my first few deals. And I put in that sweat equity and renovated and, moved into doing small subdivision and development. And I also sold most of those properties, as you know, and was at different times as well. I was turning over properties just to realize profit and try to accelerate my way forward. So there was times when I sold when I didn't have to. And there's a lot, when you look back, there's a lot of purchase costs, selling costs, tax that you pay. And it did help me chunk up money quickly when I needed to, but it and it helped me put it into the business and do these other things, but it was also very wasteful. So over the last few years, when rebuilding my portfolio, I've had to decide whether I focus more on cash flow in buying lower priced properties or capital growth from higher priced, more blue chip properties with a proven history of performance. At least I saw the choices being, more towards income or more towards growth. And with my business profits being much higher and very consistent, and thankfully, property management's a pretty consistent type of business. So, we're working with people for long periods of time, and we've got that, continuity. So I decided that I'd use that really strong cash flow to buy the much higher price properties that have a high land component in amazing locations. And my criteria was to find stuff that had at least an 8% average annual growth rate over the last 30 years. And I knew from looking at more of the income properties, they typically land at 4 to 5% average annual growth rate over 30 years. So when you compound that out, it can make a real big difference. Even 2% on a median house price of $500,000 over 30 years is $1.1 million. So the growth was more important for me. Each investor chooses differently depending on their situation. And if I didn't have the strong business cash flow, I would have lent more towards cash flow sooner. So I also wanted that development potential so that later on I could build and convert the properties to producing higher income if I wished. And that made a lot of sense to me, especially because I was pretty comfortable with developing, and it wasn't in my immediate plan, but it was in a 10 or 20 year period. If I want a project, if I'm bored, if I want to convert the portfolio to producing more income, and that might happen sooner if interest rates stay up for a while, then I'd look at developing some of those properties and converting to having better buildings on them that produce more rent. So my primary reason for doing this is that in bottom line dollar terms, having more of your return from capital growth of the land component of the property and less from the income component of the building on the property means that your increasing price is also able to compound out with less tax being paid on it until you sell or may never sell. So if the income component was higher, your rent was higher, you'd be paying more tax on that component along the way. And so I'm choosing to take more of my overall gain as capital appreciation on the property. Does that make sense?
Totally does. It's interesting. As we sort of unpack the entire history, I would almost articulate like seasons, right? Like you had the starting season of doing some renovations and utilizing sweat equity to go and grow the portfolio as like a bit of an investment hypothesis, through to then sort of focusing in on the business for those 7 years of going, great, like how can I do it? And you sort of dabbled in some investments along that. And then on the other side, it's going back to, great, now I've got stable, good cash flow and good profits from a business, going back into investing and saying, how can I capitalize on this as well? Like I love these stories just to understand like, great seasonality. And I am curious, because I know that people who are listening to this are as well. During that whole journey, like, where have been your biggest wins? Like, has it been biggest wins in business? Has it been the biggest wins in investments? Like, what are the ones that you look back at and just say, this is where, I don't know, I sort of put the stake in the ground and say this was the biggest win?
Well, before I get to that, I did want to mention that there's some trade-offs to my strategy too. Like I just spoke about the positives. What about some of the negatives to this strategy too? Because with increasing interest rates, properties become more and more negatively geared. And especially over the shorter term, that can be really hard to hold if you don't have that strong cash flow. And when choosing this strategy, it was more important for me to have that certainty of capital growth and consistently compound that capital base. But the other part of my overall financial plan is to diversify into other assets that create the income then. So it's not just all, there's always these camps, like, are you in capital growth camp or income producing camp? But what about creating a overall balanced portfolio camp? What about the asset allocation to put all these pieces together? So I'm not a proponent of one or the other. And my overall financial plan is about balancing the negative out in the coming years. I'm piling more into index funds, looking at a commercial property and potentially higher income producing residential like a share house. And that's going to be the next phase, the next season, if you will, that I'm going to get into. And of course, you can also combine paying down a debt and developing some of the properties, and while having rents continue to increase. And you not only then have that sizable asset base, but you can have the passive income and convert it more towards that, and I guess not rely on the sale of my business. So I didn't want to leave out the other side to that and the next phase.
It's as we unpack this, I find you to be very strategical, Jarrad.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
I'm told that a lot.
yeah, and I like it, by the way. But it's like you're one of the few people, like, I'll use an opposite to make this more example better, we'll say. If you have an internet business that's reliant on Facebook ads, doing a negative gearing strategy seems like suicide to me. It seems like insanity, because you've got so much risk that your income can just disappear at the flick of a switch.
Yep.
So your ability to be able to support negatively geared properties in that environment, I wouldn't sleep at night,
I wouldn't
honestly.
sleep either.
Yeah. Your business model, though, in the nature of like rents and tied to longer deals and very consistent, very stable, I would almost say I'll say it's close to, but not quite, like a government accountant role. Like it's a very, very, you can be sure the job's there. It's not going anywhere. It's a very stable business compared to a lot of the high risk ones we see. So you've been able to go, okay, well, I'm willing to take on risk with needing business income to support assets, noting that it does come with the downsides you've mentioned here. Again, though, it's like the next step in being strategical has become, well, how do I balance out potentially negative cash flow in the portfolio from negative gearing here through things like rooming houses, it sounds like, or multi-tenant things, or index funds, or commercial. And I do like the idea that you don't have to be one or the other. Like you really don't. It's just like your steps to evening things out or being more balanced and even open-minded to other asset classes is a really, really powerful advantage. Have you got this mapped out to a point with what good and looks like for you? Like is there an ideal outcome you're working towards within this type of portfolio?
Yeah, so I love Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. Here he is again being mentioned.
We'll get some links in the description. Yeah. Although I'll probably just say that and we won't put any links in the description. But, go on Amazon, search for the books.
But amazing book too. So I didn't appreciate the beauty of this book until I've got further along in my investing journey. A lot of it, when I read it previously at 16, just went over my head and I was like, yeah, what do you mean 3 financial plans? Well, there's a financial plan to be secure, a financial plan to be comfortable, and a financial plan to be rich. So I have my financial planner work up that secure and comfortable plan that I've got now ticking over in the background and I'm executing on. But thankfully, his plan was for me to buy X number of properties in 10 years. I've done it in a year. That's great.
So nice and slow, just take your time.
Super slow.
Exactly.
Very methodical.
Yep.
Very
So he's also like, contribute this much to super. So I've also been making the extra super contributions and piling it in because I hadn't done for basically most of my working life.
Yeah.
And I'm packing in the index funds as well because it does seem like a pretty good time with things being more, relatively better value as well. You can never choose the bottom perfectly, but when you're investing for the long term, now seems like a good time to be starting to pack money in.
I will pause you right there to say this is not financial advice. No one on this podcast is making any recommendations to buy, sell any asset classes.
What I'm doing.
Yeah, and the date has passed. Even if it was a good tip, by the time you listen to this, that has passed. It will be terrible advice to listen to us at all on that. But I will ask 2 questions here that I think are very important. For me, I feel like, again, and this is not financial advice, I really struggle with super because I feel like liquidity is the fuel of the entrepreneur. Money in super is money I'm not doing things with in business or have the ability to maneuver. And like we're creators.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really hard for me. So question number 1, but I need to, is like, how have you felt about contributing to super? And then the second component is, being you are so strong in property, and I suspect you see opportunities every day, and if not, we can get on a call and find some. How do you battle with the idea of when you're seeing these wins and opportunities, then go, do you know what, I'm going to say no to that, and I'm going to put it in a boring index fund that is...
You're an index fund sales guy, Charlie. That is great.
Look, this is what we wrestle with as investors, isn't it? And this is the interplay that no one else understands because we've also got our business to invest in as well. And then if you do well in one asset class, you just want to keep piling in there. So
I didn't want to be greedy and ask 3 questions, but yes, I would have liked to have tagged that on. So let's just tackle that as a topic because you have a significant advantage. Like you are, as I said, like I think you're an expert in the Perth market. I could completely understand where it's like, this is my zone. I'm going all in. I'm a specialist. Yeah. This diversification stuff, suck it. Not in.
Well, that brings me back to Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. So I figure if I have that secure and comfortable level sorted, and it's very mechanical, very process focused, it's about having the backup of the super to fall back on. It's about having those index funds, just building and growing in the background too. And then you've got your property. But now I'm sort of more quickly moving to that rich level where I say to my financial planner, okay, we've got this secure and comfortable level sorted. I appreciate you can't advise me to keep buying properties, but because property is what I love, here's what I'm going to be doing to get to the rich level on top of these other things. So I think it's also a mistake to, early on, I wanted to concentrate and make these other things really work and get your wealth chunked up. I think if you try and diversify, and this is not financial advice, but just my journey, I think if I was going to try and put money in super and money in index funds and buy a commercial property on top of trying to do residential previously, I think you need to concentrate early on, become a master at it, become really good, and then start to spread that asset base around. And that's my
That's
thinking.
where you are in the journey.
Yeah, and that comes back to sort of what we've spoken about before, which is like the stay in your lane and then make a conscious decision to go into the next one and the next one. But one thing I found fascinating in your sort of the foundational investments, I didn't hear the business. I didn't hear the sale of the business sitting in there. Like the business is not an asset that you look to say, this is the foundation for me to sell one day. You're looking outside of that to say, hey, there are other asset classes that I need to have foundation where the business, like where does that kind of sit on that investment journey?
Well, it is a very saleable asset, and I do track the value of it, and it's very known in our industry what the multiplier is, and there's a lot of rent rolls being purchased around. So I'm very conscious of what that exit would be. But I also love what I'm doing, and I don't want to force my children into real estate. But if they wanted to do real estate, I'd love for it to be, a family legacy business. Of course, they might turn around and say, Dad, we hate the idea of property.
Look at both of you. It's like the example of they're going to run in the opposite direction.
I was talking to a guy last night. I went to a property meetup. It was quite interesting. There was a father-son duo there, and I was like, "Oh, how did you get into business with your father?" And he's like, "Well, initially, he goes, I didn't want to." He's like, "I repelled it." He's like, because Dad was into it, I straight out didn't want to be involved. But yeah, funnily enough, through the education of real estate, he's like, no, it was more me not wanting to work with Dad, not that this wasn't a great thing. And I'm like,
I love the business. Didn't want to work with my parents.
Yeah. And that was the same for me. So, my father was a builder. I was a plumber. And I was like, the idea of working with my dad, I liked it, but at the same time we clashed and it wasn't enjoyable. So it kind of repelled me from the industry. And in knowing that and hearing these things and the way we speak, I still want to force Jack into real estate.
I mean, I say I don't want to force it, but oh God, nothing would make me prouder.
Although I will say, like, I was 19 and I had this upbringing of going, whatever Dad said, I'll do the opposite. So he's like, don't get a motorcycle. Damn straight, I'm going to get a motorcycle. Don't move and live overseas. Oh, I'm moving and living overseas. Go and be a consultant. Don't start a business. Oh, you bet your ass I'm going to be starting
I've got a plan, guys. So what we'll do is we'll tell our children, guys, opposite. We'll just do the exact 100%. Opposite of what we want. Or it's like, don't get into real estate. It's a horrible business, all right? I want you to do something much safer. Yep. And then they'll push them in.
Yeah, Jarrad said they say that to the kids.
This is great.
And they're like, yeah, good point, Dad.
It's going to start this afternoon when I get home.
I will mention this one point though. Believe it or not, when Jack was first born, I would take him on these walks in the pram, and I would actually play Rich Dad Poor Dad on a Bluetooth speaker.
Oh, so good.
As I walked him up the hill, just in case anything would get in. But and Lexi, I, of course, was enjoying it a lot.
Every day. I'm listening to Full Stack, and she's getting educated.
Jack's sleeping and just like playing like the Rich Dad Poor Dad in the background.
And it was funny the other day because I was like, hear this, Lexi, these guys, I'm going to be on their podcast in a couple of weeks. So she's just like, whatever.
Now Lexi's like, never going to listen to podcasts again. So I am curious, going back to those sort of three layers, like you were talking about the foundational layer from Robert Kiyosaki, and then you were saying that you've set up that sort of foundational layer and you're stepping into sort of the next layer. I'm curious, so that's where you're at now. Like, is that what you're focusing in on? And so the business is sort of punching away, and now you're saying, great, I'm going to take the profits, I'm going to invest them into that next step. Like, what is your primary focus now, and what are you looking at next?
Well, yes, that's a good question. So next for me is going to be, because I've got properties in Perth and Brisbane, I'm wanting to increase the diversity and add something in Melbourne, another blue chip sort of development type property. And I figure be a bit counter to everyone else. And while there's a bit more supply and things are down to look there, but Perth to me still has the best opportunity of all the capitals in Australia. Got to slide that in, but because I'm so concentrated there, I want to. The diversity is more important to me than the shorter term gain. And whereas,
hold up. I'm impressed you managed to take a stab at Melbourne so heavily and still want to counter invest there. That's no rivalry at all. And I tend to agree with you a little bit on that, but that's just fascinating. It's like, I know Melbourne's terrible and a shithole and been through a lot and no one wants to live there, but I'm still going to buy a house there.
Yep.
No apology.
Perfect timing to get in.
All right, shots fired. I get it.
Yep. But look, then I'll probably move back to either the commercial or a home with multiple occupancy in Perth, where it's a bit more close to home, and keep piling in the index funds and just executing that boring part of the plan. So
awesome. Now, it's fascinating. I want to make sure.
Great. You left me hanging.
Before we finish this one off, where have the biggest wins been for you in this journey, Jarrad? It sounds like you've got a phenomenal business, a great investing portfolio. What's worked the best for you here, or where have you seen the substantial wins? And then we'll wrap this one up.
Well, not repeating the same mistakes as my dad, I've got to take the most satisfaction from. So spending the mornings with Lexi, and I've had every Friday off with her since she was 1. So for the last 3 years. We call it daddy-daughter day, and she loves it, and go to gymnastics or dance. And, I'm that token dad among all the housewives, these things. But I just get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And our family home that we bought 18 months ago has been a massive win. So that was in a blue chip investment location, and it's gone up $500K over that 18 months. So that's awesome. Solid.
Congratulations.
So really thrilled that we ticked the getting her into awesome schools as well as the investment hat as well. And probably my biggest win would be in the 3 to 4 years before the last 2 years, our rental market dropped considerably. So our average rent decreased by 33%. It was pretty brutal. And my income with the business is directly tied to that rental price. So I was sitting at about a 20% profit margin at the time, and I went down to negative 5% at one time. It was ouch. It was brutal. So it was the toughest fight of my life for business survival. And, thankfully I had a wonderful team, and being forced to make changes and having your back against the wall is either going to destroy you or give you a massive kick in the ass to innovate. And, I changed our systems, I changed our processes, I restructured, I changed our marketing. All of that enabled us to become the best property manager in Australia because I had to survive.
Yeah.
So the bank was, I had covenants over the business too, I should mention, for growth when I took out that business loan. So they're like, Jarrad, you still need to grow even though the market's decreasing. And, if you don't, we're going to come calling. So
we didn't even tap into that, but even the additional pressure of having a loan against the business, it creates what we'll call it a level of urgency.
Yeah.
I feel like it creates like a unique advantage though.
It did, in hindsight. But
you've got a bear chasing
grey hairs if you're tuning into the video.
Yep.
That's what that's from. So I clawed my way back, restoring our profits to that 20% margin. And this is up to about 2 years ago. And then since then, the market's come back. And now with Perth being one of the best places to invest in Australia, our rents have fully bounced back, and we're, pile that extra 30% back on top of my 20% margin and on top of my business value. So it's all come around to, be well worth it. And I'm just so glad that my team stuck in there, my clients stuck in there. It was brutally tough, but the reward on the other side of that being, awesome. Forced to run lean and innovate. And, so that's my biggest fist pump win,
Congrats.
What a journey, man. And congratulations. And again, we will wrap this one up, but I just wanted this story I just think is so powerful for all the full stack business owners out there. As Jarrad, you've been able to do what we as a brand are trying to represent, play in the worlds of successful business, invest in well out of it, good family values as well, which I think many of our audience stand for and want to achieve. So big congrats to you. I'm going to wrap this one up from here, but thank you so much for coming on the show and really being a full stack business owner.